Hello, and welcome to my video. Today I will be continuing with my Black History Month series covering films by Black creators. Today I will be reviewing the filmography of an Academy Award-winning British director, Sir Steve McQueen. I will be covering his films Hunger, Shame, 12 Years a Slave, and his anthology series of shorter films, Small Axe. Let's get started with his first feature-length film, Hunger. Focusing on the 1981 hunger strikes by Republican prisoners in Northern Ireland, Bobby Sands is one of a group of prisoners who first took to the blanket with a dirty protest in pursuit of their claims for recognition as political prisoners. Sands then became the first one of the group to embark on a hunger strike that was to end with his death. Hunger is available for rent or purchase in Canada, or on Canopy, which you may be able to find through your library. It is available in the US on AMC Plus, DirecTV, IndieFlix, and Plex. I don't know why, but I thought this was a boxing movie before watching it. It is definitely not a boxing movie. This film has very little dialogue in the beginning and relies mainly on diegetic sounds and visuals. The prison environment looked quite dirty and disgusting, which, makes sense in some ways. It's a dirty protest. There was some visceral scenes of guards brutalizing the prisoners for their blanket and no-wash protest. Michael Fassbender was the standout performance of this movie. It was hard to watch his health deteriorating, and he began to resemble Christian Bale from The Machinist. The problem I have with this film was that some of the editing choices made it kind of hard to follow, and I would rather they had introduced Michael Fassbender's character earlier than a third of the way through to get us more connected with his story, and just because I was more interested in that section than the other characters of the film. But it was still a pretty good one, so I would recommend checking it out if you're interested. Now let's move on to his second film, Shame. Successful and handsome New Yorker Brandon seems to live an ordinary life, but he hides a terrible secret behind his mask of normalcy. Brandon is a sex addict. His constant need for gratification numbs him to just about everything else. But when Sissy, Brandon's needy sister, unexpectedly blows into town, crashes at his apartment, and invades his privacy, Brandon is finally forced to confront his addiction head-on. Shame is available on Plex or Canopy in Canada, or for rent or purchase in the US. So it's not available on any streaming services out there. This film has a haunting yet beautiful score. As with his previous film, Steve McQueen focuses less on dialogue and more on visual storytelling. Although there is more dialogue in this film than there is in Hunger. Overall, the acting is pretty good, but I felt there wasn't enough depth in the overall story. And I'm not usually a fan of ambiguous endings, since I generally find them to be a lazy attempt at prestigious filmmaking, but it worked for me in this film. Like, with this question of, does he grow and evolve, or does he relapse in his sex addiction? It was very human as a story. So I really appreciated that. Now let's move on to the Academy Award-winning film, 12 Years a Slave. In the years before the Civil War, Solomon Northup, a free Black man from upstate New York, is kidnapped and sold into slavery in the South. Subjected to the cruelty of one malevolent owner, he also finds unexpected kindness from another, as he struggles continually to survive and maintain some of his dignity. Then, in the 12th year of the disheartening ordeal, a chance meeting with an abolitionist from Canada changes Solomon's life forever. 12 Years a Slave is available in Canada for rent or purchase, or you may be able to find it at your local library like I was, and it is available on HBO Max, DirecTV, and Spectrum in the US. I've only seen 7 films with Chiwetel Ejiofor, but I believe this is his career best performance. I also thought that Lupita Nyong'o was incredible for this being her feature film debut. I'll have to commend Sean Bobbitt on his beautiful cinematography throughout this film, and it was astoundingly complemented by Hans Zimmer's, as always, wonderful score. I like that most of the white characters in this film aren't shown as good, even if some of them are nicer than others. While I state for the record that not all white people are evil, I myself am half white. Those who supported slavery and the oppression of Black people are complicit in hatred despite how much they seemed to care. For example, Benedict Cumberbatch's character, Ford, tries not to separate a mother from her child by attempting to buy them both. While this was a nice gesture, his character is still a bad person because he supports slavery. Moving on to some of the complaints I had with this movie, I would say I'm not a huge fan of movies that start in the middle and work their way back to the main plot, since it makes the audience just wait to reach the scene again, that section again. Luckily for this film, the intro doesn't give too much away, but I was still somewhat confused and waiting for it to return to that part of the film. I'll also say that it didn't feel like it had been 12 years, but I understand that it would be hard to differentiate each year since I would assume the book doesn't either. Mainly, I had issues with Paul Giamatti and Sarah Paulson's performances, although I will say that I generally take issue with their performance in their other movies that I've seen. Sarah Paulson wasn't as much of an issue in this one, though, since she wasn't playing a huge role. Fun fact, this was the first film by a Black director to win Best Picture, followed by Moonlight in 2017. So now I will be skipping over Widows, which I didn't rewatch for this watch through, this review, but I have seen it in the past, so I will be including it in my overall rankings. So I will be moving straight on to his anthology series, Small Axe. All episodes of Small Axe are available on Prime in both Canada and the US. So we'll start off with the first episode, Mangrove. The true story of the Mangrove Nine who clashed with London police in 1970. The trial that followed was the first judicial acknowledgement of behavior motivated by racial hatred within the Metropolitan Police. A few things I wanted to mention, it was how great Letitia Wright was in this movie. Her performance in this film is, I think, one of her strongest, although I've only seen her in 6 other projects, and mostly either as Shuri in the MCU or in smaller roles. The rest of the cast is equally excellent in portraying these real-life people. I want to especially commend Sean Parks for his role as Frank Critchlow, since he was cast only 3 weeks before production began and didn't have long to develop his characterization and master a Trinidadian accent. I also found the story to be much stronger than the Trial of the Chicago 7, which came out last year. In giving us the background on each person's lives, we were able to connect with each character, and it was easier to follow since it was told in a linear fashion rather than cutting back and forth. Now let's move on to the second episode of this anthology series, Lovers Rock. A single evening at a house party in 1980s West London sets the scene, developing intertwined relationships against a background of violence, romance, and music. While I will admit that it was well shot, the problems lie in its lack of story. There's not much substance other than a few brief, quickly resolved conflicts. This was one that I had to fight to pay attention, although I will say that the music in this was great. Now let's move on to the third episode, Red, White, and Blue. Spotlighting the true story of Leroy Logan, who at a young age saw his father assaulted by 2 policemen, motivating him to join the Metropolitan Police and change their racist attitudes from within. I'll start off by saying that John Boyega was great in this as the leading man, and his performance in this made me more excited to see what he does in another film, 892, later this year. I've only seen him in smaller roles or less than stellar movies, generally speaking, so this was a great departure. There are 2 of his other films that I've yet to see, but hear great buzz surrounding them, which are Detroit and Attack the Block. This was a very important story to tell since I had never heard of Leroy Logan and his mission to fix policing in the UK during the 1980s, and to see how these institutions that need diversity have a hard time reaching that due to stigma of those in the community and racism within the community, causing people to leave even if they join. I will be moving on now to the 4th episode, Alex Wheatle. The true story of award-winning writer Alex Wheatle from a young boy through his early adult years. Having spent his childhood in a mostly white institutional care home with no love or family, he finally finds not only a sense of community for the first time in Brixton, but his identity and ability to grow his passion for music and DJing. When he is thrown in prison during the Brixton Uprising in 1981, he confronts his past and sees a path to healing. The early part of this episode was lackluster, in my opinion, with not much of a cohesive story and constantly flipping back and forth between multiple time periods. The best part of the episode came from the black and white section with photos and voiceover narration, and post that segment, the episode improved, but still wasn't enough for me to enjoy since that was only the last 20 minutes. Now let's move on to the final episode of Small Axe, Education. Education is the coming of age story of 12-year-old Kingsley, who has a fascination for astronauts and rockets. When Kingsley is pulled to the headmaster's office for being disruptive in class, he discovers he's being sent to a school for those with special needs. Distracted by working 2 jobs, his parents are unaware of the unofficial segregation policy at play, preventing many Black children from receiving the education they deserve, until a group of West Indian women take matters into their own hands. I really felt empathy for everything going on in this episode. A child exiled from his peers, going to a school where teachers didn't care to teach and leaving them further behind than those going to quote unquote normal schools. The acting was pretty good, and I could tell how personal this story was since Steve McQueen himself was placed in these remedial classes due to his dyslexia. I could relate to this story since I too have had negative educational experiences, and I've had to overcome these with the help of my parents advocating for me. Part of that is like when I was going into high school, I didn't feel confident enough in my ability to do science and English. So I put myself in these applied classes, and my parents told me to switch into the academic classes. And without them having that encouragement, or without them encouraging me, I wouldn't have been able to go to university. I wouldn't have been able to graduate university. So I owe it all to them pushing me. This episode just went to show how much we as a society need teaching staff who care for each and every student and put in the work, and some people may need a guiding hand every once in a while to put them back on track, rather than being left behind. The only issue I have with this episode is that I wished it delved deeper, as this was also the shortest Small Axe film. Overall, I would say this series had some highs and had some lows, but I think Steve McQueen, maybe he works better in giving that a little bit of extra time for each film. So, you know, with Hunger and Shame and 12 Years a Slave, he had a year or so in between, so he was able to give it that extra time and care, although he had been developing this from 2012. But still, I feel as though each episode could have been a little bit deeper, and could have been a little bit longer, even some of them, just to flesh them out a little bit more. As I did with my previous director review for Spike Lee, I'm also going to be covering the director trademarks that I noticed from Steve McQueen's movies. One of the things I noticed was he uses a lot of long takes. In Hunger, he had Bobby Sands and the priest have a conversation that was an unbroken take, 17 minutes long, and it was rehearsed 12 to 15 times per day, and it was nailed after only 4 takes. So that's pretty impressive. Shame also had a long take of 6.25 minutes, so 6 minutes, 15 seconds, with Sissy and Brandon's argument on the couch. 12 Years a Slave also had a couple of long take scenes, although less long than the previous 2. One of them being the slave auction that was 3 minutes long, and the other being Patsy getting chained and whipped by Epps, which lasted 4 minutes and 46 seconds. There were probably also some in Small Axe, but I didn't have the timing, and a lot of the other ones that I mentioned were on IMDb in the trivia section, if you were curious. Another thing I noticed was he uses a lot of long sequences with little dialogue and more focus on the score and the diegetic sound and visual storytelling. The other thing I would mention is kind of a trademark, but let's go with more so earlier on than now, which was casting Michael Fassbender. He was in Hunger and Shame and 12 Years a Slave, but since then he hasn't been in any of the other ones, Widows and Small Axe. We'll see if he's in any other ones that come out in the future. Now let's move on to my ranking of all 9 films that I've seen, short and long. At number 9, we have Small Axe, Lovers Rock, which I rated a 2.5 out of 5. At number 8, we have Small Axe, Alex Wheatle, with a 2.5 out of 5. At number 7, we have Small Axe, Education, at 3.5 out of 5. At number 6 is Shame, with a 3.5 out of 5. At number 5 is Hunger, with a 3.5 out of 5. At number 4 is Widows, with a 4 out of 5. At number 3 is Small Axe, Red, White, and Blue, with a 4 out of 5. At number 2 is Small Axe, Mangrove, at a 4.5 out of 5. And at number 1 is 12 Years a Slave at 4.5 out of 5. The average rating that I gave his films is a 3.61. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any suggestions or information you'd like to share, leave a comment down below. And if you'd like to see more from me, hit the subscribe button. Next week, or actually in a few days, we're going to have the Batman premiere. So in preparation for that, I'm going to be watching Matt Reeves films, and I'll try to get that to you just before the Batman comes out, and then maybe I'll also do a Batman review. I'll probably go see that in IMAX on opening weekend. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.